Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mark. Good morning. It's great to be with you again. My name is Chris, unless I've done something wrong, in which case my name is Christopher. Hey, Ginger? Yep, I get that a lot. We are continuing with a story of Esther this morning. So if you have your Bible and you want to turn to chapter 5, we'll be reading that shortly. But before we do, I want to test you while you're looking for Esther chapter 5 by asking you, what is the greatest Star Wars movie of all time? Christmas Special. Love it. Love the left field answer. At least it wasn't Phantom Menace. That's great. The correct answer, if I can have the screen, please. The correct answer, of course, is Rogue One. Controversial. Rogue One, released in 2016. And in case you don't know the story, it tells the story of a bunch of rebels, and they're willing to stand up, and they risk their lives to try and steal the plans to the Death Star in order to overthrow the evil empire. And they don't know how they're going to do it, they don't know how it's going to work out, and they know that they might die as a result of doing it, but they stand up and they do it anyway. And this narrative of the insignificant people willing to stand up against the evil empire to overthrow them is quite a common one that you'll find in movies, of course. The greatest literary achievement of the 20th century is, of course, Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it. He was the father of modern fantasy. And again, Lord of the Rings has this theme as well. A group of people willing to stand up to overthrow an evil empire. They don't know how they're going to do it, but they're willing to give it a go, and they know it might cost their lives. Especially when you think of two small hobbits entering into the enemy's land against all odds to try and overthrow Sauron. Also in Lord of the Rings, there's this key moment, and I don't think Lord of the Rings is a spoiler at the moment. I think it's all well known that I'm safe. But there's this key moment in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf comes back from the dead, shock horror, and he comes back as Gandalf the White. And when he returns and he meets Aragorn and Legolas, etc., he says this: "I come back to you now at the turn of the tide." So there's this key moment in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf is back, and he's come at the turn of the tide. Sauron's forces are at their greatest. They're about to siege Minas Tirith. It looks like all hope is lost. But Gandalf says, "I come back to you now at the turn of the tide." The tide is all the way out. The characters don't know how it's going to get from there to here, but something in the story has changed. The significant moment has happened, and the outcome of the story has changed because Gandalf is here at the turn of the tide. And when you're a character in a story, it doesn't feel like that. They don't know how the tide's going to get from there to here. They don't know how it's going to all turn out all right in the end. But literature is safe because you're in the hands of an author or a director who is sovereign over the destiny of the characters. So when you're reading it, it feels safe when you can trust the author. So even in Pride and Prejudice, when Elizabeth rejects Mr. Darcy's proposal and they say rude things about each other, "Oh no, how's it going to work out?" You know it's going to be fine in the end because it's Jane Austen. There are rules to these things. See, I'm getting all the demographics this morning. I hope you appreciate that. But you can trust the author. And it's not the same when you're one of the characters in the story. You don't know if it's going to be safe and it's all going to work out in the end. And that's not real life either. Is it? Is life like that? Is life safe? You don't know how it's going to end. But I put to you, if you're a Christian this morning, you can trust God as the author of your life. You don't know exactly how it's going to play out from here to there, but you know the end of the story because it's secure. And this book of Esther is fantastic storytelling. A few weeks ago, I read it from beginning to end, and I think it's probably the first time I've actually sat down and read Esther as a story rather than just through a Bible reading plan. And the narrative's fantastic. It contains tension, drama, foreshadowing, political intrigue, partying, and violence. It's a great narrative, but it's historical events. These are stories that actually happened with God as the author, working behind the scenes to achieve his good purposes. Today in chapter 5, we find ourselves bang in the middle of the story at the pivot point, at the turning of the tide. The setup for the previous 4 chapters is complete, and now comes the time for action. This is the significant moment. Esther's going to take the plunge, and the audience holds their breath to see what's going to happen. You see, to this point, she's been playing it safe. Arguably, she's been in survival mode in the story, but now she jumps off the cliff. Will her parachute open? We're going to read and find out. So if you want to turn to Esther chapter 5, and it will be on the screen as well. Also, Esther chapter 5 is helpfully divided into 2 halves for us, and we're going to take it half at a time. The first half focuses on Esther, and the second half focuses on Haman, who's the baddie in the story. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is this: if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has asked." So if we wind it back a bit, we learnt in the previous chapter that the Jewish people are threatened with genocide. A decree has been issued, orchestrated by Haman, the chief advisor to the king, but enabled by an absent king who seems to only care about conquests, lavish feasts, and drinking. Through God's providence in horrific circumstances, Esther, a Jewish girl, finds herself as queen, in a position to maybe do something about it, but she's still vulnerable. She knows she could get killed. It's made clear in the previous chapter that if she's going to approach the king without invitation, her life is forfeit and she will be executed. She also knows that the previous queen that she replaced was cast out on a whim, and the king has plenty more queens where they both came from. But she's in a position of influence, so encouraged by her uncle Mordecai, it is now time to act on behalf of the Jewish people. She asks the nation to fast for her for 3 days, and we read that at the beginning of chapter 5, after 3 days. The Jews have been fasting for her, for favor, for God to act and save them from this situation. And then comes the moment when we hold our breath, because this could all end very quickly. This all takes place in the palace in Susa, which is quite a well-preserved and excavated archaeological site in southern Iran. So these walls in the foreground here is kind of the footings of all the walls of the palace. And this aerial shot here shows you kind of the scale of it and how far the palace spreads. The events that we're reading about today is believed to take place here. So this little square here is understood to be the throne room, and archaeologists have found what they believe to be the base of the throne in that area there. Which means here, this is the inner court where Esther wasn't allowed to approach without invitation. So Esther comes into this court here, and the king sees her and invites her to come close. And we read that she's not immediately killed, so far so good. Instead, King Xerxes extends to her the scepter of his favor. This means that she's allowed to approach him, that she's acceptable in his sight. And so she comes forward and she touches the end of the scepter in humility, gratefully accepting his favor and acknowledging his position of authority. You see, up to this point in the story of Esther, Esther has known favor despite her circumstances with people that she's come across. And it continues here. And let me just say this. You know, God is sovereign over how people respond to you. You know, God is sovereign as to whether they accept you or reject you in any moment. You can't control what others think about you, what they say about you, what they do to you. But you can trust that God knows how to take care of you in the moment. Once there, and this fascinates me, why does Esther play it the way that she does? Like, why doesn't she just go to the king and just get straight to the point and say, hey, my people are threatened with genocide. Don't you know they're all going to be wiped out? And by the way, I'm a Jew. And it's all plotted by Haman over there. Why doesn't she just do that? I just want to get it over with. But she doesn't. Instead, she arranges a feast. And she doesn't actually get to the point at all in this chapter. So you're going to have to come back next time to find out what actually happens. This is all about feasts, arranging 2 feasts. Why does she play it like that? Now, on one level, maybe it's as simple as, if you want a king to do something, get them drunk. But effective, if not particularly moral or ethical. That's on one level. Why does she invite Haman? Does she intend to confront Haman directly in front of the king? Does she want to call him out? Does she have a clever plan to trap him all along? Or is she just winging it? Is she just going in, not knowing exactly what she's going to say and hoping for words in the moment? Is she afraid to speak up? Maybe she intended to blurt it all out on the first day, but then actually said, oh, let's have a feast. The Bible doesn't actually tell us why Esther did it this way, whether it was a plan or whether she was making it up in the moment. Clearly, the time was not right to tell the king immediately, but she's walking a very narrow tightrope here. She's in a very precarious position. If it was me, with dragging it out a couple of days, I wouldn't have slept. It would have been agony. But one thing's for sure is this is a game of political intrigue. And I reckon the king would have been teased by this. I think this appealed to his interest. I think it flattered his ego. And I think he's enjoying the game for now. Because Esther also knows how fickle King Xerxes is, how quickly he turned on the previous king and effectively ended her life. And she knows that Esther's life could end at any moment. But whatever her intentions, God is at work behind the scenes. His sovereign hand is working through her willingness to act, and his providence is achieving his purposes. This is how our God works. And when I was reading this, it reminded me of this passage in the New Testament where Jesus is talking to his disciples and he's sending them out into the world. And he says to them, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And what he's saying is, as disciples, you're going out into the world, and yes, it is going to be dangerous, and not everyone will accept you. Don't be naive about this. Be shrewd, be wise as serpents in your dealing with the world, count the cost, think things through, but also be innocent as doves and maintain your humility, your grace and your purity as you trust God in the moment. And I think that's what Esther does in this story. And I've been thinking a lot about how to be a Christian in the world today. You know, in New Zealand, we don't know open oppression against Christians in this country today, but subtle suppression is around us everywhere in the air we breathe, every day. And we have to decide how and when to stand up for Christ. In the previous chapter, Mordecai says the famous verse. He says to Esther, who knows, maybe it was for such a time as this that you were put in this position so that you could act. And before we go any further, let me just say this. So often as Christians, we look for those big moments, those big heroic moments where someone gets saved or someone gets healed and it's glorious and it's wonderful. And those times matter. But I think for such a time of this does not just mean the one action. I think it means ongoing influence and a steady presence in the world with those that you encounter day by day. And those big moments, those peaks, they arise from a vast landscape of faithfulness over time, of doing the ordinary, day in, day out. Don't despise the small things. It's okay to quietly live out your life, knowing that by being faithful, you are influencing the people around you. But there may come a time when you have to make a stand. And I'm not talking about taking a stand for poverty, taking a stand against slavery, taking a stand against injustice, all of which is great, but all of that will be applauded by the world as well. I'm talking about taking a stand for Christ, declaring yourself a man or a woman of God, and separating yourself from the modern world. And this takes wisdom, and you should count the cost and be careful of the moment that you want to do this, but there may come a time when you do that. Another thing that fascinates me in this story is, to this point, Esther has kept her heritage hidden. So while she's been there in the palace, she hasn't let on that she's a Jew. This has meant some compromise for her in practicing being a Jew. And I feel this challenge. The Bible doesn't tell us in Esther whether this was right or wrong. It just says this is what she did. But I feel that. I can relate to that. The book of Esther also has lots of parallels to the story of Daniel. So Daniel was another Jew put in a position of influence and power for such a time as this in the same kingdom 70 years previously. And the way Daniel handles that is quite different. See, Daniel is open with his Jewish heritage and his beliefs, and he's praying by an open window, and he's openly disobeying the king's edicts. Whereas Esther, it seems, is more subversive until the time comes. And the Bible doesn't prescribe. It doesn't tell us in any particular moment. It doesn't give us a playbook whether to be open or not. And I struggle with this, honestly. I find myself at the moment, for now at least, a senior executive in a large organization. And I find it hard to know in any given moment when to stay quiet about my faith and when to be open with it. Let me give you one example. A year or so ago, I was given the opportunity to give a presentation in work during Mental Health Week. So my subject was I was talking about my own struggles with depression and how I dealt with that, what that felt like, different tools and strategies for dealing with depression in the workplace. And this presentation was going out online, and anybody in the company across the country could join. And as I was preparing for that, I actually consciously thought through, do I talk about my faith in this moment? Because the reality is, if it wasn't for God, I might not be here now. I don't know how I got through those times. God got me through those times, as well as my family and as well as everything else that we did. But I chose not to talk about it, rightly or wrongly. I even had the question afterwards, which kind of opened the door for me to say, well, actually, also, I'm a Christian, and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't. I chose not to in that moment. And I don't think second-guessing is necessarily that helpful, but I do regret that today. And I think I might do it differently next time. But I was conscious of my position. And it's not an easy thing to try and work these things out. But then I think of the amount of times in my career where God has given me people in my team who are going through major life events. It happens surprisingly often. People are going through bereavements or health issues or major shocks. And I just think my role in that is to just provide a stable, safe, and secure work environment for them. So at the very least, I'm not adding to their misery. But they've got somewhere in their life which is stable and secure, where they're accepted. And there's even been those rare moments where I've been able to pray with people in the office. And I say to you, don't despise the small things. Faithfully seek God as part of your normal routines, and he will guide you with what to say in the moment when it comes. This passage in Matthew finishes a few verses later with this, where Jesus says, when you're brought before kings and authorities, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given you in that hour. In the moment, the words will be given to you that you need for that moment. And I wonder if that's how it was for Esther. She stepped forward, she took the plunge, not knowing exactly what to say in the moment, maybe. And there'll be situations in your life when it's right to take risks and situations when it isn't, and that's okay. And God puts us in roles, positions, and places, and we may not exactly know why. All we can do is stay faithful in the moment, and there may be one opportunity for you to speak to authority from a position of influence, and this takes wisdom. All we can do is be faithful and keep our eyes on the Lord, and there is a still, quiet voice guiding us in the moment, whether to act or delay. And last week we had Steve Maynor speaking to us, and he quoted this verse from Isaiah. Your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it, when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left. And a few weeks previously, we had Brad Carr here, and he encouraged us with this. If God has placed you in that job, that place, then you are not enough, but God is. So seek his guidance and then act. So that's the first half of the chapter about Esther. And then we go on to the second half of the chapter. We're going to pick it up from verse 9, and we're going to read about Haman, who's the bad guy in the story, and how he handles his position of influence and authority. Verse 9, and Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart, But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Then Haman said, "Even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with her and the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast." This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Haman is also in a position of influence with the king, apparently much safer than Esther, as a man and as the chief advisor to the king, but we see that he handles it completely differently. He thinks he's safe. He thinks he's on the inside, pulling all the strings. Even the queen invited just me and the king, he says. And to this point in the story, he's been manipulating the king since the start. And he's pleased with his political maneuverings. Oh, how we can think we are in control when things go well, and that we've earned these positions for ourselves. But we also see in the story his insecurity, how he rages when he sees Mordecai, that Mordecai doesn't respect him. See, Haman is not satisfied with his power. How entitled and arrogant he seems. He feels the need to enforce his position. He huffs and he puffs to protect it, and how childish he seems in the face of Esther's apparent composure and grace. But then again, if you think that you created your position of power, you will think you need to fight hard to keep it and protect it from others. Do you ever feel that insecurity? Or can you just let it go and trust that God has you? Don't worry when others are raised up above you or you are overlooked. Trust the providence of God, that you are in the right place, and do what he has put before you. He is good and he is for you. And I think it's really interesting, that's Haman. I think it's really interesting what Haman does when he feels threatened by Mordecai and he starts getting angry. He composes himself, and then he gathers his family and his friends around him. He surrounds himself with his yes people, his sycophants who say, "Oh, yes, you've done wonderful. You deserve all this." And he tells them how rich he is, how many sons he's got, what the position of power he's got, and he boasts to them in his pride. And they all go, "Oh, yes, Haman, you're wonderful. You deserve it all." And what's more is Zeresh, his wife, says, "Oh, don't worry about that, Mordecai. Arrange to have him killed because you deserve it. You deserve the honor he should have given you. He deserves to die." He surrounds himself by all these sycophants, building him up in his pride. And what does pride come before? Fall, which is a phrase you can find in the Bible in Proverbs 16. So my question for you is, when things go well for you, how do you respond? In those times where you might have enough money, you might have a wonderful family, you might have been promoted, treated with honor, you've got your health, when you've got everything you need, when things are going well for you, how do you respond? Because I know that when things go well for me, I'm in the greatest danger. Because I forget my spiritual disciplines, I forget to pray to God because I don't think I need to, and I start to think that I created all this for myself, which is nonsense because it's all a gift. It's all grace. There's a well-known verse in Philippians 4 where Paul is writing to the church in Philippi, and you might have seen this on a bumper sticker or a Christian bookmark. Paul says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And it's a wonderful statement of faith, and I could do anything because Christ is with me, and we've probably sung about it in church before. But the context is really important. And the previous verses say this. Paul says, "I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." You see, what Paul means is he knows how to be content in poverty and content in riches. He knows how to be okay when he's put down and okay when he's raised up, because in all those situations, he's trusting Jesus. And Jesus can give him the strength that he needs in all of those situations. And he fixes his eyes on God. And if there's one verse in the Bible that I think really summarizes the contrast between Esther and Haman in chapter 5, it's this. It's so good it's in the Bible twice. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And in this story, we see Esther, I think, approaching with humility, seeking God in prayer and fasting and getting others to pray for her, then having the confidence to step forward, but even in that moment, acting with grace and humility towards the king, trusting God, full of grace. And I think God gives her grace and favor in that moment. Conversely, we have Haman, who is incredibly proud and arrogant. And what does this verse say? God will oppose him. There's no middle ground here. It's not God will give you favor if you trust him and then he's neutral and he's passive. No, if God is not for you, God is against you. God opposes the proud. Just imagine that, what that means. And what it means for Haman, which we'll see in the coming chapters, is that God will turn Haman's very plans against him. Haman, with all his smartness, with all his shrewd political maneuverings, with all his riches and his power, God is going to turn even Haman's plans against him. And my favorite verse in this whole chapter is the last one. Did you pick up on it? The last one says, Haman goes and builds the gallows. And whoever put the chapter division here deserves a raise. This irony is delicious. This cliffhanger is awesome. And it's so juicy, I can't resist jumping on it now. So with apologies to the preachers who are coming after me. But with this, the final set piece is in place. The stage is set for the rest of the story to unfold. And we've heard of these gallows before. They were mentioned earlier in the story of Esther. You might have it written as a wooden stake in your Bible. Either way, it's 23 meters tall. You either impale somebody on it or you hang somebody off it. It's for executing Mordecai. Haman has built this specifically to kill the one that he's angry with. But the delicious irony here, and I don't think this is a spoiler, much like Lord of the Rings, the delicious irony here is that Haman will be hung on the very gallows he has built. And you'll have to come back to see how that unfolds. But he will be hoisted by his own petard. And the foreshadowing here is not just within the book of Esther. The foreshadowing here is right into the New Testament, 500 years later. Because this word, which is either translated as gallows or stake, literally means a wooden beam. And what does that remind us of? The cross of Christ 500 years later, where Satan sought to kill Jesus. Satan entered into Judas to betray Jesus. Jesus was arrested and ultimately crucified on a cross on the wooden beam, the wooden stake into the ground. But in that exact moment, death was defeated. The price for our sin was paid. The only thing that Satan could hold against us was that we broke God's law and deserved death. But that punishment has been served on the cross, and I am free. I'm free. Satan has hung himself on the cross. He tried to kill Jesus, and he ended up killing himself, hoisted by his own petard. In his very moment of victory, he was defeated. And because Jesus came, the turning point of history has been reached. Because Jesus has come to us now, the tide has turned. The outcome has changed. The enemy has been defeated, though it might not seem like it. Death has no power over you if you are in Christ. The end is inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And as characters in the story, the only thing that matters is what will we do with Jesus. But because Jesus died on the cross and paid the price for us, we have the King's favor. We can approach the throne of the King of the universe holy and acceptable in his sight. And this is so powerfully played out for us in the story of Esther. And when we enter the king's court, the king's face brightens to see us. He clothes us with royal robes like Esther. He is pleased with us and he bids us come close. He lifts his scepter to pardon us and welcome us into the majesty of his throne room, filled with the glory of his presence. His scepter is held out to you in welcome today. Will you reach out and touch it? And our God is not a fickle king like Xerxes. He's not prone to sudden mood swings. He will never cast us out on a whim. We aren't at risk of death because the death has been paid if we're in Christ. So unlike Esther, you don't need to play games with God. Just come as you are. You are accepted just as you are, with all of your imperfections, your weaknesses, your desires, your hopes and your fears. You can trust him if you accept Christ, that he paid the price for you. And Hebrews 4 tells us, therefore, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. The tide has turned. We can approach the throne room of God, and our salvation is secure if we accept Christ. Get the band back up. Thank you. And as we go into this last song now, I just got a couple of questions for you. Can we all stand? Great, thank you. And as we sing this last song, I'd encourage you to open your hands to receive from God. And I've got two questions for you. And the first one is there something in your workplace that you need to stand up for? Do you need to speak up about something?